Once upon a time, and before you say anything, yes, I know you have heard stories before, but I am begging you, this one is different. There was a woman in the village of Palmarin, in the Sine-Saloum Delta of Senegal, and this woman had hips. My people, hips. Not the ordinary kind, not the kind that you see and think it's okay, nice, and continue with your day. The kind that made the whole village stop what they were doing. The kind that caused arguments. The kind that made men travel from other villages specifically to witness, as though they were going on pilgrimage. The kind that our mother looked at one day and said a quiet prayer because she understood immediately that this child's life was going to be complicated. Her name was Ndéye. Just Ndéye. One name. Because in Palmarin, when somebody said Ndéye, nobody ever said which one. There was only one. There would only ever be one. The universe had clearly put in overtime on this particular assignment and was not repeating the effort. She was 24 years old. She had a laugh that could make a funeral slightly awkward. She cooked djeboujen. That is the Senegalese rice and fish dish. And if you have never eaten it, I am sorry for your life. She cooked it so well that people would arrive at her house on a random Tuesday with no invitation and somehow still get a plate. She could read in 2 languages. She knew the name of every bird that crossed the delta. She had more sense in one conversation than the entire village council had in a full year of meeting. But ask Palmarin to describe Ndéye. They would start with the hips. Every time, without fail, as though everything else she was, the intelligence, the cooking, the laugh, the 2 languages, the birds, was a footnote. Supporting information, a nice bonus that God had included after the main event. Women like this exist in every African village. You know them. You have seen how the village treats them. And if you are one of them, my sister, this story is for you. Settle in. Because today, Palmarin is going to learn a lesson. The expensive kind. The kind that stays in the village memory of generations and gets told by grandmothers to grandchildren with the specific tone of a person who was there and is still processing it. Now, the village of Palmarin, and it's a beautiful place. I want you to understand, it sits in the Sine-Saloum Delta, where the water and the land cannot agree on where one ends and the other begins. The people are Sarah people, proud and deep-rooted, the kind of people who bury their dead on an island made of shells, because that is just the kind of village they are. This Palmarin had a problem. Debts. Big, ugly, growing, interest-collecting debt. The kind that started as a good idea. They borrowed money from a merchant in Dakar to build a proper fish storage facility, which was actually a smart plan. Well done, Palmarin. But then the rains were bad. The fish were scarce. The prices in the market dropped. And the merchant, who had seemed like a reasonable man at the first meeting, turned out to have the patience of someone who had been patiently waiting to stop being patient. For 3 years, this debt had been sitting on Palmarin's chest like a stone. The fishermen were going out earlier and coming back later and still coming back with not enough. The elders were meeting so often, they practically lived in the meeting room. And the 40-day deadline that the merchants had given them was now very, very close. Palmarin needed money. Palmarin needed it fast. And Palmarin, in the specific way of communities that are desperate and not thinking clearly, had begun to look around for what it had that could be converted into money quickly. And somebody, we do not know who, and honestly, whoever it was should be grateful that history has not recorded their name. Somebody looked at Ndéye, and then somebody else looked at Ndéye, and then the whole council, one by one, looked at Ndéye. And Ndéye, who noticed everything, noticed them looking, and she felt For the first time in her 24 years, the very specific feeling of a person who has just realized she has been assessed and appraised like a piece of land. She did not like this feeling. She filed it away. She would deal with it. His name was Demba. He was 43. He was from Dakar. He had money. Real money. Not village man money. City money. And he had decided, after a lifetime of acquiring things, that the next thing to acquire was a wife. Not just any wife. A wife that was a statement. A wife that people would see and understand immediately that Demba was not a small man. He had heard about Ndéye, the way these things travel. Through traders and boatmen, and the general network of people who move between the Delta towns and Dakar, carrying goods and gisting in equal proportion. Someone at a gathering had mentioned her. Someone else had confirmed. A third person had said she was also very intelligent and capable, and Demba had nodded at this information like a man who has just been told that a car he's buying also has good fuel economy. Nice bonus, not the reason he is buying. He arrived Palmarin on a Tuesday morning in a car that was clean and a ground boo-boo that was white and silver, and announced him before the door opened. He had 2 associates, he had gifts, and he had a number, a bride price figure that he mentioned privately and carefully to the village council within hours of arriving. The number was almost exactly, my people, as in within a small rounding difference, the amount of Palmarin's debts to the Dakar merchant. Now, whether Demba had done his research and knew about the debts and calculated this deliberately, or whether this was a coincidence so suspicious that coincidence itself would be embarrassed by it, nobody asked. Because the council heard the number and the debt number was sitting right there in all of their heads, and the 2 numbers shook hands and smiled at each other, and the council forgot to ask the uncomfortable question. They went to Ndéye's father. Her father, who loved his daughter and was also a man carrying 3 years of financial anxiety, went to Ndéye. And Ndéye listened to everything. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, in the calm voice of a woman who has seen this coming and has had time to prepare her response, "And what does Palmarin offer me in return for saving it?" Silence, because nobody, not one person in any of those meetings, had thought to include this question in their calculations. They had been so busy solving their problem that they had not noticed they were proposing to use a person to solve it. These are different things. Very, very different things. Because this story has a love inside it, and the love deserves its own introduction, and I refuse to rush it. Ndéye was 26 years old. He was a carpenter. He made things with his hands. Chairs, doors, fishing boats, small carved objects that Palmarin women bought for their homes because they were genuinely beautiful, the kind of beautiful that makes you feel calmer just by having it near you. He was quiet in the way that is not shyness, but is just completeness. Like a man who does not need to fill every silence because he is comfortable in his own skin and has nothing to prove to anyone. He was not rich. Let me be clear about this. He had no car, no ground boo-boo of white and silver. He had a workshop with good tools and a small house he had built himself. And yes, it was small, but it was the kind of small that was solid and well-joined and watertight and would outlast half the bigger houses in Palmarin because the man who built it paid attention to the parts that nobody sees. There is a character in that. If you know, you know. He had loved Ndéye for 3 years without saying it in actual words. He said it the way quiet men say things. In how he listened when she spoke, like she was the only person in a room full of people. In the carved wooden comb he had left outside her father's door on her birthday with no name on it, but everybody knew because who else in Palmarin was carving wooden combs to that level of detail? In the way he was always somehow nearby without being in the way, present without demanding to be acknowledged. Ndéye had noticed. Listen, Ndéye noticed everything. She had noticed Mbaye approximately 2 years ago and had been quietly deciding about him ever since. The way a woman who is serious about her life makes decisions. Carefully, without announcing the process, but moving steadily towards the conclusion. When the news of Demba spread through Palmarin, and it spread the way village news spread, which is faster than Wi-Fi and considerably more detailed, Mbaye heard it at his workshop. He put down his wood. He sat for a moment. He picked the wood back up. Because a man who builds things knows that when there is nothing else you can do yet, you continue with what your hands know. That evening, he went to find Ndéye. She was sitting by the lagoon. This was her place, the edge of the water where the delta light went golden in the evening, and the birds did their final crossing, and the world went quiet in that particular way that feels like permission to think clearly. He sat next to her. They were quiet together for a while. These two had the specific comfort of people who have been orbiting each other long enough that silence between them is not empty. It is full. Full of all the things they have been not quite saying for 2 years. Then Ndéye said, without turning, "You heard." "I heard," said Mbaye. "The whole village has already decided," she said. "They haven't said it to my face yet, but I can feel it. The way they look at me now, like I am the solution and they are the problem, and they were just waiting to connect the two." Mbaye was quiet. Then he said, "What do you want, Ndéye?" "My people." That question. Because I want you to understand what had been happening all day. Her father had come to her and told her about Demba's offer, and told her about the debt, and her about the village situation. The council chairman had sent someone to talk to her. The women at the well had surrounded her with advice that was really just pressure dressed in a sympathetic wrapper. Everybody had been asking her what she thought of Demba, what she thought of the money, whether she understood the seriousness of the situation, whether she had considered what would happen to the village if nobody had asked her what she wants. Not one person. Until this man, this carpenter with no car and a small house, and 3 years of quiet, honest, unperforming love. "I want," she said slowly, "to not be the price of something." Mbaye nodded. "And I want to choose my own life." He nodded again. She looked at him for a long time. The water moved. The birds went home. And in that silence between two people who have been circling the same truth and have finally, in this golden delta evening, stopped pretending to be busy elsewhere, everything that needed to be said was said without anyone opening their mouth. "I know I have nothing that compares to what he is offering," Mbaye said. "Honest, not self-pitying, just true. He is offering money," Ndéye said. "You have been offering yourself for 3 years. These are not the same category of thing." She stood up, tied her wrapper, and walked home. And Mbaye sat by the water for a long time. And the Sine-Saloum moved around him, and inside him, something that had been held very carefully in place for 3 years shifted. Not into certainty, not yet, but into the cautious, warm, quietly terrifying feeling of hope. Now Palmarin, as I mentioned, is a village of warm hearts and periodically terrible judgment. And when the situation with Demba became public knowledge, which took approximately 1 afternoon, the village split into 2 camps so fast you would think they had been preparing for it. Camp 1 said, "The debt is real, the consequences are real, Demba's money is real, Ndéye is young and she will adjust, and marriages happen this way, And nobody is saying she has to like it immediately. And has she considered what happens to this village if the merchant come and we have nothing? Has she thought about the fishermen's families? Has she thought about the children? Is she going to let everybody suffer because of her personal preferences? Camp 2 said, "Una de mad." Well, they said it more diplomatically than that. But that was the energy. Camp 2 said, she is a human being and not a commodity. And if Palmarin has reached the point where it is prizing its daughters as solution to its financial problems, then Palmarin has a problem that is much deeper than any debt and paying off one debt by creating a different kind of debt. The kind you owe to a woman you traded is not a solution. It is a postponement. Camp 1 was louder. Camp 2 was smaller but had in its membership every woman in Palmarin above the age of 45, which meant it had the people who had seen enough of life to know how this kind of thing ends when nobody stops it. And it had Mame Rokaya. Mame Rokaya was 78 years old. She wore white every single day. White bubu, white head wrap, the way certain elders do when they have arrived at the stage of life where they have decided that dignity is the only remaining dress code. She had buried 2 husbands. She had raised 7 children. She had sat through enough village meetings to have developed a specific facial expression for foolishness that did not require any words and was more effective than most words anyway. She summoned the council, not the other way round. She summoned them, and she said, short, clear, the way people talk when they have run out of patience for complicated language. A village that is saved by selling one of its own has not been saved. It has made a trade. And I have lived 78 years, and I am telling you, what you do to the soul of a community when you teach it that people are for sale does not wash out. It sits in the ground. It grows in the next generation. Find another way. She waved her hand. The council left. Mame Rokaya drank her tea. Here is the thing about Ndéye that Palmarin kept forgetting. While everyone was talking about her, she was thinking. She had asked to see the death papers. Her father had them and didn't fully understand them. He was a fisherman, not a document man, and Ndéye had read them once, and then twice, and then a third time with the focused attention of a woman who knows something is in there and is going to find it. And on the third reading, she found it, a clause, small, buried in the kind of language that is deliberately difficult to read because the person who wrote it did not particularly want it to be read. A clause that said the repayment schedule could be formally renegotiated without penalty, without additional interest, if the village could present a demonstration of economic capacity and a forward plan, witnessed by a representative of the district authority. The merchant had not mentioned this clause. Funny that. Ndéye wrote a letter in the careful, precise language of a woman who has been reading seriously since she was 14 and knows exactly how official documents are supposed to sound. She wrote it to the district authority office in the regional capital. She explained the clause. She explained the village's situation. She requested the formal process. She gave the letter to a boatman traveling to the city. She paid him with her own money, money she had been quietly saving from selling smoked fish on the side. Because Ndéye was always doing something on the side. Ndéye was never just one thing. Then she went back to her daily life. She cooked. She went to the market. She chatted with people. She smiled at Demba when he passed, politely, warmly, in the way a woman who has no malice towards a man who is simply wrong. And Demba smiled back and adjusted his grand bubu and still believed that the situation was going his way. It was not going his way. Every evening, Ndéye went to the lagoon. Every evening, Mbaye was there. They talked about everything except the obvious thing, the way people do when the obvious thing is too important to rush. 40 days in a village with a crisis is a long time, my people. Let me not pretend otherwise. Palmarin was tense. Demba was still there, still patient, still bringing gifts, still conducting himself correctly. Because say what you want about Demba, the man had manners. He was just wrong. The council was still arguing. The fishermen were still going out early and coming back late. The women were still taking sides. And Ndéye was still smiling her calm smile and going to the lagoon every evening, while internally she was counting days like a general counting supplies. On the 19th day, a letter arrived from the district authority. The clause was confirmed. A representative was coming. The negotiation process was the village's legal rights under the original agreement terms. Ndéye brought it to her father. Her father brought it to the council. The council read it 3 times. Then the chairman, old Amado, sun-cracked face, 40 years of fishing behind his eyes, looked up and said quietly, "Who wrote this letter?" Ndéye's father said nothing, but his face said everything. That particular expression of a man who is proud and surprised and slightly embarrassed that he is surprised. On the 28th day, the formal presentation was made. Fishing records, capacity, forward plan, all of it written clearly, organized carefully by Ndéye, who had spent 4 evenings at the kitchen table with her father and 3 council members teaching grown men how to present their own village's story in a way that the district authority would receive. On the 32nd day, the merchant, finding himself suddenly facing a district representative, a formal process, and a clause he had hoped nobody would read, agreed to a new repayment schedule. 3 years, original terms, no accumulated interest, no crisis, no emergency sale, no Demba. Just a woman who could read, and a letter, and the specific quiet power of a person who solves the problem before the problem finishes introducing itself. The celebration happened on the 33rd day, and it was the kind of celebration that Palmarin had not had in 3 years. The full kind, the real kind, the kind where everybody forgets what they were worried about and remembers that they are alive and together, and the water is still beautiful and the fish will come back. It was Mame Rokaya who started it. She stood up at the gathering in her white bubu and she pointed at the drummers and said, "Play!" And then she returned to Ndéye and said, "Dance." And Ndéye, who had put on the blue and gold ground bubu that morning, the good one, the deep one, the one her mother had saved years to buy, Ndéye stood up. Now I need you to understand what this moment was. The village had spent 40 days looking at this woman as a solution to their problems. Looking at her body as the thing of value, the thing to be traded. And now, on the 33rd day, with the debt renegotiated and the crisis resolved, and the merchant on his way back to Dakar, those same hips that the village had been trying to price and sell were moving to the Serra drum, free, unchosen for, belonging entirely to their owner. Demba was at the edge of the gathering. He watched. He was quiet for a long time. And then, give the man this credit. He understood. He understood that there was a category of thing in this world that his money had never been equipped to buy and would never be equipped to buy. He went to his associates and he said, "Bring the bags." He said it quietly, the way men say things when they have accepted something. He found Ndéye before he left. He said, "You are remarkable." She said, "I know." He said, "The man who ends up with you will feel every day of his life that he did nothing to deserve it." She said, "He will, but he will spend his whole life being grateful, which is better than deserving self." Demba laughed, genuine laugh, the first one. Then he got in his car and drove back to Dakar, where he would eventually find a woman who chose him freely, which, as the grandmothers say, is the only kind of choosing that lasts. It was after the dancing, when the fire was lower and the children had been carried home, sleeping on their mothers' backs, and the elders were in that good tired silence that good celebrations end in, that Ndéye came to find Ndéye. He had been there all evening. He had watched her dance. He had not pushed to the front. He had not performed his feelings for the crowd. He had sat among the young men and watched with the still full attention of a man who knows he is watching something he will remember for the rest of his life and is not going to waste it by moving. He came to her now holding something wrapped in a cloth. She took it. She unwrapped it. A carved wooden bowl. Sarah pattern around the rim. The interlocking design that means continuity. That means what is woven together holds. He had been working on it for 2 months. He had not known when to give it. Tonight felt right. Ndéye held it in both hands. She looked at it for a long time. It was the most beautiful object she had ever been given. Not because it was expensive, because every curve of it was made by someone who was thinking of her when he made it. I have nothing that matches it, she said. I'm not keeping score, said Ndéye. She looked up at him. He was looking at her the way he always looked at her. Direct, full, without performance, without agenda, just a man who sees a woman and is not ashamed of seeing her. I want to choose my own life, she said. She had said it before. She was saying it again as an arrival, not a reminder. He said, so choose. And she laughed. The big one, the warm one, the laugh that arrived 3 steps before the rest of her. And somewhere in the gathering, the elders heard it and smiled without turning around, because that is what elders do when something right is happening behind them. Okay, look, I'm not going to tell you Palmarin accepted it immediately with no drama, because that would be a lie, and you would know it's a lie, because you know villages. There were people who said Ndéye was not enough. There were people who felt that after all the excitement, the suitor, the debt, the letter, the clause, the celebration, the ending should have been bigger, more impressive. A woman like Ndéye, they felt, should be a match that the village could show off at gatherings in other towns. There were people who said these things. And then Mame Rukaya spoke. And when Mame Rukaya speaks last, the conversation ends. Not by force, but because the weight of what she says fills the room and there is genuinely nothing left to add. She said, Palmarin, look at your boats. Look at your storage facility. Look at the agreement that says your debt is manageable and your village will stand. Ask yourselves who did that. She paused. She looked at every face. Now ask yourself, does the woman who saved this village with her mind get to choose her husband with her heart? Or are we going to tell her with our faces that saving Palmarin was enough contribution for 1 lifetime and now she must also sacrifice her choice? Nobody talked. She chose. Respect the choice. And Palmarin, slowly, genuinely, in the imperfect but real way that communities correct themselves when they are led correctly, accepted it. The women came to congratulate Ndéye. The men came to find Ndéye. Old Amadou, the council chairman, shook Ndéye's hand and held it 1 second longer than a regular handshake and said nothing. Nothing needed saying. The wedding was by the water. Blue and gold bubu. Deep green grand bubu on Ndéye because his mother insisted and turned out to be right. The Sarah drum. The real rhythm. The one that means something is starting that intends to last. And Ndéye danced. Of course she danced. Freely, joyfully, on her own terms. Hips and all, every inch of her, fully hers, completely unchained, belonging to nobody's plan except the one she had chosen. The delta caught the last light. The birds crossed the water. Palmarin celebrated until the stars had nothing left to see. And so, my people, this is where we land. The grandmothers of Palmarin would tell you this story whenever a young girl is growing up and the village starts making eyes. They tell it with tea in their hands, and the Sine-Saloum behind them, and the specific authority of women who had lived long enough to know which parts of a story matter and which parts are decoration. They say Ndéye's hips did not save Palmarin, her mind saved Palmarin. The hips were just what the village was looking at so hard that they missed the mind entirely. And that, my children, is the oldest mistake a community makes. And Palmarin made it. And Palmarin was corrected. And Palmarin is better for it, even if the correction was uncomfortable. Ndéye and Ndéye built a good life. The carved bowl still sits on the table in the middle of their house. She still goes to the lagoon in the evenings. He still goes with her. They have the comfortable quiet of people who choose correctly and know it. The fishing boats of Palmarin still go out every morning. The debt has been paid. Properly, on schedule, over 3 years. The storage facility still stands. And somewhere in Dakar, Demba found his own person. Somebody who saw him and chose him, which was what he needed all along. Even if he didn't know it when he drove his clean car into Palmarin in his white and silver boo-boo, thinking he was going to buy a statement. You cannot buy Ndéye. That is the summary. Write it down. This has been the story of Ndéye of Palmarin, the woman the village tried to sell, and the man she chose anyway. From the Sine-Saloum Delta in Senegal, where the water and the land still cannot agree on their borders, and the grandmothers still wear white, and the drum is still playing if you listen close enough. It is told, it is finished, and if anyone tries to price you, my sister, find your claws.